Hi everybody, I just wanted to take a few minutes to run through the different population statistics that you're going to see on the test and that you're going to need to know. This is only if you need it as extra, only if you need the help. But you're welcome to view through this and see the different types of statistics we're going to see. One of the big things when we're looking at population is looking about population change. What causes populations to grow and what causes populations to shrink. And when you're really looking at this, you're looking about births and deaths, and then the resulting natural increase rate, which is what measures them. So when you're looking at these three statistics here, the first of these is the crude birth rate. And the crude birth rate it's a very simple calculation. It's just how many people are being born. It's not saying where they're being born. It's not saying what type of person is being born. It's just total births per 1,000 people alive. As an example, if we're looking at Shoreview here, which has about 26,000 people, and we say its crude birth rate is 10, that means there would be 10 births for every 1,000 people. So in a given year, Shoreview would see 260 babies. So it just allows you to look for the entire country, for the entire population, how many babies you're going to see being born. If you look around the world at this, the highest birth rates tend to be in sub-Saharan Africa. So the center part of Africa, south of the Sahara. In many of these places, it's as high as 40, which 40 is considered a pretty high crude birth rate. 4 times as high as in places like Europe, where the birth rates are 10 or below. 10 is considered to be a low crude birth rate, which means there's not many babies being born. So notice that the less developed countries in the world are the ones that are seeing the most babies being born. And as for why this is happening, we'll get to it later. Another connection here is crude death rate. And crude death rate isn't looking at any specific age group. It's not asking if it's elderly people that are dying or middle-aged people or infants that are dying. It's just total deaths in a country's population. And so when you're looking at this, you calculate it the same way that you would calculate the crude birth rate. Though the pattern in the world is not the same. It's not exactly lined up with development. It's the least developed countries, yes, they do have high crude death rates overall. But it's also some more developed countries that have high crude death rates as well. And one of the main reasons for this is not just because of development, but because of the age of the population. Young people, middle-aged people, tend to be healthier and recover better from diseases than people who are elderly. Simply put, old people are better at dying. So countries that have an old population tend to be the countries that have the highest crude death rates. So if you look on the map there, you notice that in parts of Europe and Russia, there are very high crude death rates, as high as some places in sub-Saharan Africa. When you combine these two together, you get the natural increase rate, which is simply a percentage. Births rate minus death rate divided by 10 gives you a percent. What percent will this country grow in a year? The world as a whole grows between 1 and 1.2% a year. So if the world has 7.5 billion people right now, that means the addition of the world's population, births above deaths, will be a little over 80 million people this year. The world will gain that many people. Some countries are much higher. Above 2% is considered a high natural increase rate. Above 3% is considered ridiculously high. Below 1% tends to be much of the more developed countries. They are not growing very quickly at all. If it's 0 or below, that means the country is not growing or it is shrinking. If you look at this, though, of course, the natural increase rate is highest in the poorest countries in the world. These are the countries that have the least amount of resources, the least amount of money, the most amount of poverty. That's why people leave fast-growing countries and move to other more developed countries. This is why places like Europe and the United States see more people moving to them. People are coming out of these countries that are quickly growing and moving into the countries that don't. Because one of the main reasons is that the richest countries in the world aren't growing or are negative. The countries that have the greatest number of resources to support their people are also the countries that don't have as many people to support. When you're looking at NIR, this can also impact a statistic called doubling time. And doubling time is simply how many years it's going to take for a population to double. Whether it's 40 years to double, 70 years to double, or 25, though 25 would be ridiculously fast. It's related directly to births minus deaths. If the death rate goes up, the country will be growing more slowly. So the doubling time will increase. It will take longer for the population to double. If the birth rate increases, well then, the doubling time will go down because it's growing faster. The higher the NIR, the lower the doubling time. There's an inverse relationship between those two. If you look at the doubling time, there's a direct connection to the growth rates in the upper right-hand corner there. You can see how many years it means if the percentage is. So if the world's growing at 1%, that means the doubling time is 72 years. It would take 72 years for a country to double its population if its growth rate is 1%. Though the world, being at 7 billion now, is actually never expected to double. The growth rate is expected to slow down to the point where we eventually will tail off a little over 11 billion. We'll never hit 15 billion that it would take to double what we're at right now. There's a lot of other statistics, so I'm just going to roll through those quickly for all of you. Total fertility rate is very simply how many children the average woman will have in her childbearing years. Childbearing years are considered a time that women are able to give birth most easily. This is between 15 and 49. In many parts of the more developed world, this is at 2 or even less than 2. In some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, it is at 5. The highest right now in the world is 8. The average woman has 8 children, which means half of women in that country have 8 kids or more, which is a bit crazy to think about. Now, notice while the more developed countries have it low now, in the 1950s or 40s in the United States, the total fertility rate was at 5, which is where it is right now in Africa. So while countries become more developed and become wealthier, you see this go down. And one of the main reasons why you see it go down is because of the infant mortality rate. This measures what percentage of newborns will die before they reach childhood. So in the first couple of years of life, what percentage of newborn children will die? Which is a really sad and depressing statistic. Nobody really wants to think about dead babies, but it has a huge impact. The poorest countries tend to have very high infant mortality rates. The richest and most developed countries, as well as the most equal countries, tend to have very low infant mortality rates. So if you look at parts of sub-Saharan Africa, there's a very high IMR. Very many kids dying even before they become kids. And this comes back to the question of why do some countries have higher crude birth rates? One of these, it's because in a lot of these countries when more people live in the countryside or live on farms, yes, you might need a few more people to work the farms, but also if you're afraid that your kids are going to die, you will have more kids. Parents want to see their kids survive. Parents want to see their kids do well, outlive them, be there to take care of them when they're old. And if you don't think all of your kids are going to survive, then you're going to have more kids because you want to see them out there. You want to see them have a good life. And so there's a direct correlation between the countries with the highest IMR and the countries with the highest total fertility rate. This also plays a role in life expectancy. If many people are dying young, this brings down the life expectancy of the country. So countries where it has a very low infant mortality rate, where healthcare tends to be really great, these have the highest life expectancies in the world. Japan is well over 80, which is the highest of any country that you're looking at. In Afghanistan, it's one of the lowest in the world. 45 is the life expectancy there. And this is just a simple calculation. How many years on average will people live? So that's the average. Half of people will be lower than that. Half of people will be above that. Once again, there's the connection that life expectancy is longest in wealthy countries and shortest in poor countries. In case you haven't noticed a trend here, there's a trend here. This brings us into the idea of dependency ratio. In some of the developing countries, over a third of people are less than 15 years old. Think of 1 out of every 3 people in the entire world being your age or less. That means way more people. You know those grades below you at Chippewa and Highview that you loved so much and all those kids are fantastic and amazing and you just want more of them? Congratulations. If you were in a less developed country, there would be way, way more of them. Whereas in more developed countries, you're seeing the opposite happen. It's something that's called a gray tsunami, a wave of elderly and retired people for the country. And in each of these cases, far too many young people or far too many old people, this is a problem for these countries to deal with. And so this goes into the idea of dependency ratio, because all of these people are dependents. They depend on someone else for them. Right? If you're a young person, or if you're a baby, you need somebody to feed you, to work and make money so they can take care of you, to drive you around to places, to make sure that you're able to do things that you're not able to do. Just like if somebody is elderly or retired, you need somebody to take care of you, somebody to make money so that they can buy food for you, somebody to wipe your butt, somebody to drive you around to these sorts of places. It happens on both ends of the spectrum. Having a dependency ratio in the 50s or 40s or 30s is considered pretty good overall. But once you get above 60, it's considered a problem for that country, and there's a lot of issues that go in with that. Notice that after World War II, in the early part of the graph on the lower left, China and India had ridiculously high dependency ratios. That's because they had so many kids. That's why China had a one-child policy, because of how many babies there were in the country. But if you notice, China, which is the blue line, at the end of the graph starts to creep up again. That's because the one-child policy was too effective. People had so few kids. Now when they retired, who's there to take care of them? So the dependency ratio in China is going to go up again because there are so many elderly now to take care of instead. Well, those are a few of them. Let me know if you have any questions. Take care, everybody.